Here we go. My pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Kristen Wicker, who will discuss the role social media plays in increasing community scientific participation. Dr. Wickert is a professional naturalist in Appalachia who studies fungi, arthropods, and plants and how they interact and rely on each other for survival. She posts engaging and educational scientific content under the handle KDubs, the hiking scientist. And side note, I highly recommend following her on Instagram. I have learned a lot. Please remember to put an asterisk next to your questions in the chat so that I can flag them for the Q&A afterwards. It is now my pleasure to turn the mic over to Dr. Wickert.
Hey, thank you so much. That was very kind of you. It's also very kind of you to invite me to SciViz. I'm really flattered and I'm excited to share my life experience over the past couple of years with social media. And I never thought I'd be talking about it, but here I am. So I'm going to show a presentation with some beautiful photos that I've taken and just a little bit of background in how I feel with my own personal experience. Social media can be utilized as a tool to increase community awareness of issues that we just had an awesome conversation about, and also their participation in scientific endeavors. So I always have an outline because I just like to follow through with keeping ideas, and you're seeing where I'm going while I'm rambling. But I'm going to introduce myself. I'm not necessarily a medical scientist. I don't publish awesome, cool pictures of brains. That was amazing. But I do take photos, I guess, and put them on social media. So I'll talk about the different forms of social media in a really brief discussion, because I know not everybody knows all the different types that are out there, and there's new ones all the time. How I use social media and community science as a whole, because that is also an evolving term and science in itself. And then I have a few fun examples where community data have been utilized in peer review science, which is happening more and more because we're getting better at developing tools to collect and utilize community science. So I am Kristen. My name is Dr. Kristen Wicker, but I also go by this internet persona of KDubs, the hiking scientist. And it kind of organically formed a few years ago, but I am a professional naturalist. I have had several jobs that just keep changing, but they're all nature related. So I just go with professional naturalist for the time being. But I have a bachelor's in forest biology. I have a master's in plant pathology, which was focused on entomology. And if any of you know what plant pathology is, it's the study of things that cause disease in plants. So really, you are a professional naturalist of everything when you study plant pathology, because everything likes to eat plants, and we can learn just about any kind of organism you want in that field. I also have a Ph.D. in plant pathology, where I focus more on mycology. And I've worked professionally as a forester, like very classic, cutting down trees to make toilet paper kind of deal. I was a research scientist. I've been a professional entomologist, botanist, and I've also worked as a program coordinator, where that's kind of like where I am now. I focus a lot more on talks like this, where I utilize my professional experience to show how to do and how to inspire and how to get people involved. And I've always been interested in art. Back in high school, I was not very studious. I used to skip all my classes to hang out in the art room. And that would probably not happen today, but I was luckily born a long time ago. So I love incorporating art when I can, if I ever have time. This was a campaign I did with my previous position. I was an entomologist that rose public awareness of invasive species. And we will talk about this invasive species later. But I did a fun thing with kids across the entire Mid-Atlantic region, where I made origami of the insects. They took it home, told their parents. Really good community outreach project. So what is social media? I don't know, we all know about it, and we hear about it on the news, we hear about it from our aunts, all that sort of stuff. But the definition of social media is a website or an application that enables users to create and share content or to participate in social networking, right? It allows for quick and widespread information, but it is not peer reviewed, and there's no accuracy guaranteed in the things that you see, which I know we are probably all aware of, especially since we just survived an election and now we're dealing with all sorts of other things in a pandemic, right? But it can be used to share credible information as long as there's kind of the right people putting out the right kind of content out there. And this is my paper, or one of my papers. This is just a screenshot of what I'm sure you're all familiar with, science, right? It looks pretty intimidating even for me, who is the one who wrote this. So asking a regular person who does not have an advanced degree to understand something like this, which is honestly, all I did was plant seeds and watch them germinate. It wasn't a hard concept, but having someone who doesn't have an advanced degree try to read this and understand it versus something like this, where it's an eye-catching photo of the process and then a short blurb about what's going on, really can bridge the gap of people without advanced degrees to even be interested in the topic that we work so hard to understand as scientists. And of course, there's also the concept of the paywall, right? This is the only one of my scientific publications that's free, and I have no input in that, right? So I'm able to supply my information online and via social media for free, so people can learn about it and not have to pay $35 for 4 hours. And I really think this is an interesting part of social media, that there's different cultures that are associated with different social media apps. And I bet there are scientific papers about how that process evolved, because I don't feel like any app was like, this is how we're going to do it. It just kind of expanded naturally based off of some of the criteria. But there are several social media platforms that all have their own culture and best utilization tactics in the successful use of science, communication, and inviting community action. And the big ones, in my personal opinion, are of course Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And I feel like Snapchat and YouTube are also well understood. And there are others. There's always others. Every day there's a new app that's being introduced, and some can end up being successful and some can end up, having a peak in their success and then tapering off. So Facebook is the old school social media platform. I remember when it was exclusive to college kids. I remember you had to have a college email to get Facebook, and then what it was like to actually have everybody on Facebook, right? But the main thing about Facebook was that it was very personable, and it was an immediate circle of your peers, right? It was your family, your friends in high school or college, and then it has expanded over the last 14, 15, 16 years. But it is now the most used form of social media with the most users and frequency of use. So out of all of the social media apps, Facebook is the one that gets the most time of people scrolling at midnight to see what's going on, because of that personal relationship that still exists, even though it's expanded. You're able to share links, videos, articles, and photos with even plain text. And there's, as Facebook keeps evolving, there's new things that keep happening. Like you can share a feeling, you can check in, there's life events. And I don't know if you've ever looked at them, there's a life event for a broken femur. So you can do anything you want on Facebook pretty much. And it even has this new feature of the reactions, right? So on a post, there's no longer just liking things, there's different reactions. And little do people know that these reactions actually feed algorithms that influence the way that information is dispersed. And this is a relatively new discovery, or things that are getting out there, that posts that get a reaction of an angry face get more circulation because it invokes a visceral reaction in people and makes them spend more time on the app, right? And that's what leads to things like this happening, where Facebook spreads fake news faster than any other social website, according to new research. So we can keep that in mind, right? And it's not all bad about Facebook. You just have to figure out how to utilize it for your scientific or your professional needs in ways like Facebook is great for community events and planning. And this is just an example of a club that I'm in, the Mushroom Club of my state. I'm going to be giving a talk and putting this on Facebook, distributed it to people who are in my state. And this actually got a lot of attention because we put it on Facebook and it was a shareable thing. So it can be utilized for good, even though it gets a lot of advertisements for being, fake news spreader. And Facebook's also awesome if you want to get information or create a community about a certain thing you care about. I'm just going to stick with mushrooms. I like a lot of different stuff, but for examples of this, I love mushrooms. And if you want to join a mushroom club, of course, there's one of them, but you can become so hyper specific on Facebook there's groups within the group of mushroom called All Things Polypore. And you can see this, the mushroom identification group went from 72,000 or 62,000 people who are reached by a single post of a mushroom to this super specific group of having 4,000 people who are learning specifically about polypores. And then you can get down to the nitty gritty nerds only kind of obsession level, where you can learn about mushroom parasites. And there's still 3,000 members here that are acting as a community, sharing scientific papers, sharing their discoveries about their research. And it's all open to whoever wants to join this group, right? You can do it for anything. Twitter, I personally do not have, but I enjoy looking at it late at night. But it is advertised as the elevator pitch platform, where you are limited to 280 characters. And you can see this kind of as a classic screenshot here of what a Twitter post would look like. It can share a link, it can have some text, and it can get reshared and liked. But it doesn't have really that personal feel of all the options of Facebook. You can show pictures, but not as a main feature. It has more abrupt points. And in my experience, I've seen a lot of people who are SciCommers or just celebrities in general. They'll have different personalities of themselves on different apps. And Twitter has kind of been the personal account for many of these SciCommers and other people, where they put their genuine opinions. And the patron saint of Dolly Parton made this. She actually made this of herself, where you have your own different personalities depending on what app you're using. And of course, Twitter is also susceptible to retweeting and sharing of inappropriate information or incorrect information. Instagram, it focuses more on interacting with a community. It really has a lot of features that go back and forth, so it can actually invoke conversation. But it was invented in 2010. It allows you to have many more characters, 2,200. So it's a visual blog. It allows you to have 1 to 10 photos per post, and you can associate hashtag, location tags, and tag other people in it. Again, it has that big community feel to it. And communication is the focus. There's live video chat features, there's private messaging, there's all sorts of things that allow for community. And this is just a photo of me with a group of people I met, all based off of Instagram, because we have the same community and shared interests that were found via things like hashtags and location tags. It also has stories, Instagram Reels, which are videos, and Instagram seems to be transitioning to video content, which gets much higher engagement because it allows them to learn almost in real time or hands-on instead of just photos. But there's plenty of studies, which I'm sure a lot of you brain surgeons are aware of, that show that visual input makes more of an impact than text input. TikTok is the short video form with shocking content. It used to only be 15 seconds long that you could post a video, so it had a kind of a wow factor to it. But just like all other apps, is expanding the time that you can put information on it. And videos are now going to be 10 minutes long on TikTok. But TikTok really became a life hack resource in the last couple of years, where it is a quick science resource as well, where people are able to show a background with scientific figures or photos, and they're able to explain it with a video of themselves in front of it, and also to put text on it. It's been really interesting to see how information about the vaccine was able to be spread correctly by scientists who study it. But also, of course, there were people who were able to make whatever they wanted to say about it and spread that misinformation. So let's talk about your job as a social media SciCommer, if that's what you want to do and you want to spread awareness about your topic or your science or your lab. First thing I want to say from my personal experience, it is a job. It is not all fun. It is time consuming. There are like rules you have to follow if you want to get a lot of people interested in your topic. So time management is an important aspect of thinking about making a social media account. If you want to do that for your lab, or you want to showcase like some kind of research or crowdsource, it's a lot of engagement that matters. But a good thing to do is to develop an altruistic goal, right? What are you trying to get across or spread more awareness of? You have to have a focus, right? You can't be like all over the place because it doesn't have the continuity for people to understand them. Consistency is really important, and posting high quality content that people actually look forward to learning something or seeing the next step of your research is really important. And finding your niche while embracing who you are, right? Because there's so many other people out there already doing this that you have to stand out if that's what you're interested in. And lucky for us, there's only 3 people who study beetle antenna, so you're already unique. But think outside the box and be artistic. Posts that have artistic components to it, like a lot of what we saw earlier, really make a difference. Having an artistic mindset and placement, the law of threes and stuff like that, they all matter, and they've been known about for a reason. You can identify trends and join in on them. You can network with other influencers, but be careful, because you never know what election is going to make somebody go crazy and then start to do this. And if you're associated, it could make your lab look like, bad by affiliation. And that goes for brands too. So there's a teeter-totter effect of, like, if you want to put your eggs in a basket, be aware that that might affect your image later on. And of course, you want to provide digestible information. I'll show an example of what I mean by this. But you really want to think about your goal and inspire people to get involved in whatever you care about. So this is how I use social media. I mostly stick with Instagram just because I have a real job and I don't have time to have more than my 2 or 3 jobs I always have at one time. But Instagram, I started doing it in 2015 as just a fun escape from reality, if I'm going to be honest. I was working on my master's, and I just was reading a lot of papers, and I started to think about, like, while you're reading your paper, studying for your defense, you're walking around, you see the blooming red maple, and you just read a paper about it. So I was just regurgitating the fun fact that I learned. But I wanted to keep doing that and to make this general knowledge that I found really exciting accessible to the general public, because I thought if they learned that there's male and female red maple flowers, there's a red maple right outside my window, but if there's 2 different, flowers, and it's important to have multiple trees, then it can increase the habitat and success of the ecosystem, right? I wanted people to care about their ecosystem right outside their window. And I was lucky enough to be able to experience and take photographs, and also to write down what I was reading about in my textbooks and also scientific papers. And my social media presence has always been listed as personal. So I always have personal account up here under whatever my job has been for whatever time. But I list it as a personal account because it never gets associated with the work that or the agency I work for, because then I feel that I'm allowed to be more unbiased with my own personal interpretation of data, or my own opinion of how that might work, or the statistics. A lot of things, it's up to me. It's not up to my supervisor. And it allows me to be genuine, and I also don't risk losing it when I leave a lab or anything like that. But something that really kind of changed was I used to have just my name here when I first started. I was always KW's hiking scientist. It was my name because I made it with my friends. And then it started to get a little bit more attention, and I realized I didn't want my actual name out there. So I made it into my childhood nickname, which is KW. And I put the hiking scientist because that was the brand I wanted to make. And it made it jump up. And I think it's because people were searching for hiking, or they were searching for scientists, and then it just got a lot of attention that way. But you can see I post a lot of pictures of just nature stuff that I see on the job or while visiting field sites. And we'll go back to the example of my paper here, where just looking at the figure of this page of my paper, people don't even know what ln of number of seeds means. I barely knew it. And I had to figure it out when I did the statistics on my data. And this math equation, I barely remember what it means because I deleted those years of my life. And also there's the whole factor of this is like built up information. When you become a scientist, you start, you know these papers because you had to read them for your defense, you had to read them for class, and you take it for granted that this isn't all well-known information that can be supplied to just a general, conversation. So it becomes really restrictive in many ways, along with the money factor, that people can't read your paper even if they had access to it. So let's look at how I wrote an Instagram post about this scientific paper. I literally just took a picture of the tree of heaven seedling that's being referenced in this paper here and I wrote a post about it. And I don't expect you to read this post. You can later if you want, but the post here in the beginning is just talking about like my own like experience, my personal experience with it. And then I literally have a few sentences that condense this entire page on my paper into a sentence, right? So they only have to read 78% germination success instead of finding 78% with the ln equation from this figure, right? And there's also these interesting things down here of the hashtag. So maybe someone who's interested in greenhouse management clicks on it and then finds the picture of my project in the greenhouse. I also use social media. This is that beautiful little bug I made the origami project out of. I use social media to explain why certain things are bad or good or interesting. And this is just a series of photos I use to explain why the spotted lanternfly, which is an invasive insect on the East Coast and is spreading rapidly, I actually physically explained why this is a bad insect, because, you know, the conversation of the taxidermy earlier, where people don't, you know, there's kind of a feeling associated with things or feelings associated with words. And so it needs to be explained, the actual science of what's going on. So I explained that this is how this long stylet here is how the insect stabs into plants and sucks out the sugars that hurts it. It uses these antennae to communicate. So there's scientists that are studying how to intercept their communication. And then there's also their cute little feet, their tarsi, and their little pads that allow them to stick onto cars as they're driving on Highway 80 at 90 miles an hour, right? And that is the way that this invasive insect is spreading across the country. So I was able to actually show them in a way how something was bad just with a picture, instead of having to actually write out a scientific paper and prove it. But there are some trends I've noticed about posts that have helped me get better at my second job of Instagram, which is color and artistic form. It gets a lot of attention because it's eye-catching and it's beautiful, right? So this was just a pile of mushrooms in Appalachia. I was out on a hike and I just sat down and relaxed for a minute and arranged them and then took a photo, and it really got a lot of attention. The first person perception is really popular, and I think that's because it almost brings the subject to you, right? Like you can almost pretend that that is your hand looking at the object, so it really makes it a personable experience through a photo. Explaining the obscure in your profession, because there's, you know, even though this is right outside, so this was literally, this weird specimen of a cicada was in someone's backyard and they sent this to my lab. Like, this is so weird that you would need someone to explain it. So having someone who can explain the obscure with their profession, that's why people come to you instead of finding that and being like, what is this? So there's a lot of chances for the medical field to do this. For a hot minute, I worked in the medical field, and this is a slice of a mouse. So like that was something that, you know, I would never now in my profession have access to something that looks like this. So sharing something that is unique and obscure to your profession will allow people to get excited about what you do. And also on the other end of that, there's the relatable. So you want to explain things that they don't have any chance of really interacting with, but also explaining things that they might see. And this seems silly, but this little chunk of blue wood is everywhere where I live. And tons of people commented on this and said, I've always wanted to know what that was. So it's something that's really relatable to them, and it's like in their world, and it makes it real, right? Or makes them value something that's in their world. And you can't be unique without you. I get a lot of interest when I post pictures of me, and I'm never in a bikini, so it's not that factor. It's just me living my life, and I think people get excited to see someone, you know, doing it and kind of sharing their story in like the form of the blog. And of course, if you have a pet, that will often get a lot of attention. So I have a cat and people really enjoy her. And I've taken advantage of getting a lot of attention on Instagram by then becoming more of like a professional resource on multiple podcasts to talk about things like the spotted lanternfly, so that it has a larger impact across the community and helps people kind of be aware of it and help professionals control it then. But I've talked about things like biocontrol, which are my expertise, to the general public public through another form of social media. I also have one of those other category social medias where I wanted to receive some compensation. I know it sounds selfish, but I was putting a lot of effort into it and I wanted to value myself a little bit. So I made a Patreon, and that is where I started making hour-long lectures where people who were interested and wanted to support me could pay a fee and attend these lectures, which went into the science of things that I might have shared a three-sentence blurb about in an hour-long conversation now, where they get to interact a lot like this. And it was really successful. It definitely has the ebbs and flows of the economy and things going on, but it is an interesting way to spread information. So let's talk about what community science is really quick. Sometimes people get confused by this term because it used to be called citizen science, but that term has been deemed not entirely inclusive because it doesn't include non-citizens, which is, you have to put yourself in other people's shoes. So it's now called community science, and it is more broad. Members of the community can contribute information, aka data, to scientific endeavors. And this can be a small scale or a large scale effort. I included a photo here of Henry David Thoreau's notebook. It is something that is still utilized today, even though he wrote it in 1858. It's his observations about phenology in animals are included in scientific papers today that are noticing things about climate change and how there's differences in bloom times, differences in winter weather. It's very interesting. So it was a small effort on his part, and it's making a big impact today. And it can be done as a single person, such as me putting out a spotted lanternfly trap, or a group of people who can all put out traps and all learn together and then bring data back to me, the scientist. And when you are trying to engage people in community science, it's important to think about a few things, right? Because they also have jobs and lives and kids and all sorts of responsibilities. So when you want to engage the public or the community, it's important to think about timing, and shortness is best. You want to involve them in something that they can do for 2 hours in an afternoon, such as a garden bird sighting checklist. It's also easy for this person to write down what they saw based off of the pictures. It's also fun. And there are a bunch of apps that are utilizing the fun aspect of games in order to make people contribute more to it, such as iNaturalist, which we'll talk about. But it makes it that, there's kind of a leaderboard. There's people who have the most observations. There's people who got the most unique observations. So it's like a game. And make sure it's efficient and correctly described for ease of application. I'm not going to mention which one it is, but there is an app that actually stopped being used completely because it was just too hard. People had to take tests in order to make sure that they were contributing the correct information, and it quickly died out as being something, even though it, like, as a scientist, it really was a valuable tool, but it didn't allow for ease of use by the general public. So what I explain to people, again, I'm a naturalist, so it's a little specific what I tell people, but the ways that I tell them that they can participate in science is by doing a journal just like Henry David Thoreau and taking notes. Including art in that is, a good experience for them to notice and take detail of things like photography or drawing. Social media documentation, because even though it's just silly Instagram, this person took a picture of this species of salamander, which is rare, and someone like me can say, oh, there it is, and I can have a conversation with that person, get more information, and hopefully protect that area the salamander's in. You can join naturalist groups for real social interaction. And even during the pandemic, these naturalist groups like mushroom clubs or native plant societies, they still did things virtually via Zoom. So they still existed during the pandemic. And there are a few electronic applications that you can contribute to specific programs. Then what I'm going to talk about that I like, just to show photography in action and getting people excited about the beauty and nature of the obscure outside, is iNaturalist, which is an app that you can download on either your phone or you can use it as a web address on your computer. And you can submit observations with a camera in real time that utilizes the GPS location on your phone, and it will submit your observation of a mushroom or whatever to a community board where people can have conversations about it and identify biological organisms and help ID species. And what happens when you make an observation on iNaturalist, which is pretty much a social media platform, it's a game, it really is, but it's helping community science, where members of this community can help identify the species. And people like Heather Holm, who I asked if I could use her photo here, and she's happy because it's raising awareness of community science. She is an expert on wasps and bees. And so people like Heather will see a photo that is uploaded and she can identify it. And she's identified more than 21,000 photos that people have put up. And her as a entomologist is able to say, oh, there's an endangered rusty patch bumblebee in Minnesota, and they can do a bigger survey and help out that way. Observations can be added to specific projects, and you think of it, you name it, it's out there on iNaturalist. Here is a project that was looking at red maples phenology. So when they're flowering was a documented phenophase, and that information is then saved in a usable format of data in several different ways. You can download it with the photos, you can download it with the different criteria you want, and then it can be utilized in your own scientific publication. And iNaturalist has been officially cited more than 2,000 times in scientific papers. And there is actually a forum, if you copy this or write it down when you see the recording of this, it's a continuously updating forum that shows, here's another paper that we utilized, observations, and some of them will be about organisms and like Simpson's diversity in a location, but some of them look at more complex things like phenology or climate change that we can make inferences off of these community observations. And they're commonly listed just in the the citations or like as a review thank you at the note of the end of the paper. Here we have including records from the online database iNaturalist. And so how I use iNaturalist in community science on the other end, as well as telling people to utilize it, I then go in as an expert, and just to continue the conversation with the invasive spotted lanternfly, I look at places that it was observed in, because iNaturalist has the GPS tag of where photos were taken. So I can know as an expert that spotted lanternfly invaded the country around Philadelphia and Berks County. And since then it's been spreading. But if you notice, we have a few observations down here in North Carolina, there's one up here in Michigan. And if we actually look at how it's spreading with the real map from the government, we can see that places are not included in North Carolina or up in Michigan. It's not even on this map, right? So these are government confirmed populations where like the DNR or a Division of Forestry or something has confirmed the populations. So me as a scientist can go on the internet on iNaturalist and look at areas that would make sense with like routes of the highway for spotted lanternfly to be next. And I can go on there and see if someone posted an actual picture of spotted lanternfly or accidentally thought that a tiger moth or a stink bug was what they saw and they put it in there. So I can go in there and confirm the identity of the picture they saw and then influence where the Department of Natural Resources would go out and do an official survey to confirm if it's there. iNaturalist also has phenology analysis now. It's really expanding as a scientific tool. You can look at things like the life stages or the sex or like the distribution of its phenophase at a different time. And you can look at the increasing invasiveness or the increasing population of the organism based off of observations. I use it as an expert to also protect species, so I can look at where invasive species are spreading, but also when a random person finds a endangered Diana fritillary, I can then report it. And also, we can have, again, professionals go out and do a survey for it because it has the date, the location, and also a confirmation photo of this endangered butterfly. Here's a real example that I did unknowingly too. So you don't have to be an expert to utilize this to help community science. I was on vacation about a month ago and I went to California and I saw this cute little adorable mushroom. I took a picture of it, put it on iNaturalist, got on the plane. And when I came back, I had a note from a science group, a science group that was looking at endangered species of fungi on the West Coast. And they sent me this message, and they were just confirming that I saw in the right place and that it was actually what it was. So it's pretty cool that I contributed unknowingly to community science, even though I'm an expert as well. You can increase the range of known and unknown species. So this is a really cute little tiny beetle. You can see I saw it through the microscope, or I took this picture through the microscope, and I put it on iNaturalist. It's literally the only observation of this insect. However, this insect lives inside of a mushroom that is everywhere. So the mushroom it lives in is everywhere, but because this is an obscure little creature that lives inside of it, it's probably not been documented ever before. So if we get more people aware of this, we can then, get more awareness about this little tiny beetle and maybe a role it plays in understanding climate change or insecticides or something like that down the road. And iNaturalist, again, is a game because it'll have like highlights where it rewards people and says, this person gets a shout out because they have the first photo of this species of a slipper lobster, and it gets put on their page. So that's pretty cool, right? There's rewards for doing the fun thing. Also, just another example of how iNaturalist shows that it alerts people. It's its own form of community science, right? Educating and outreach. If people take a picture of this, it'll say, oh, this was introduced to your area. So it just raises awareness that way. And all of these observations, they don't just stay on iNaturalist, they go to other places that are a little bit more professional. Not that iNaturalist isn't professional, but this is a super specific website for tracking invasive species. So they're able to outsource information of invasive species and help to monitor areas that it might be in with professional invasive species management associations. And just to show you how cool increased observations are, I'm sure you all know this. This is just a fun story that's commonly in the news, kind of debunking climate change, but hopefully a lot of us agree with it. But this is the example of the Washington, D.C. flowering cherry blossoms, where there will be little to no difference in a photo from 1922 of the bloom time, right? The phenology of the bloom time of cherry blossoms versus today. And this is my photo over here on the right, which this was not planned. I'm very lucky. It was literally on the same day. It was April 7th, but it was like 2019 or something. So they were blooming at the same time. So people will say, no, the phenology doesn't matter, right? Because we've seen consistent bloom times over the past 100 years in DC, because it's a really good sample size. But when you think about observations and how long the community's been aware and taking photos and contributing, 100 years versus where those cherry trees came from, which is Kyoto in Japan, they've had community science of people just loving and adoring the cherry blossoms since year 800, where they've had things like little journals and just like Henry David Thoreau's journal, we can look at Japanese observations, paintings, all sorts of stuff that have a date and see that over, a couple of years there have been variation over a couple hundred years. But when we look at 1850 and we see the Industrial Revolution, there is a really steep drop in the bloom time. And the cherry blossoms in Japan are blooming about half a month earlier now than they were historically many hundreds of years ago. So we have a larger data set of time, but we also have a larger data set in general from just the community in Japan admiring these for, part of their culture. And in a real-time example, with much smaller time frame, the Community Science Network has been able to influence laws because people have been able to take photos and make observations about phenology, such as this is an invasive shrub here in Pennsylvania. This is a myrrh honeysuckle, which puts out its leaves sooner than our native plants. And that will inhibit the growth of herbaceous things underneath where that shrub is because they're not getting sunlight because it's blocked. And that will lead to declines in our native ecosystem. But knowing this and having documentation of that actual, quantifiable data has allowed for people to write scientific papers that allow for these plants to be banned. And this has been happening kind of recently. This happened, I think, 2 years ago in the state of West Virginia. They banned Japanese barberry because of observations about how bad it was for people in people's yards. And then Bradford calorie pear is another invasive tree species. And in Pennsylvania, they just banned it last year for sale. However, there's a time period on this, and this is another way you can utilize social media. There's a time period that people who have a stock of the plant to sell can get rid of it before there's a complete ban. So a lot of those plants that are invasive are being put on extreme sale, right? Like really discounted so they can make money back on this plant they're not able to sell anymore but have inventory of. And so people with in naturalist groups are saying, don't buy this plant, it's bad, even though it's on sale, don't do it. So it's just another example of Facebook spreading the word of how this is something they can do to contribute to their ecosystem preservation. And so with that, I'm going to end my talk. I have no idea how long I talked. I had a good time, but I know that there is a time for questions. And I think, Jill, are you going to be the moderator for reading those? I'd be happy to. Great.
I am.
Thank
So
you.
If you can just unshare your screen. Yeah. Thank you, Kristen.
Oh, I'd love to unshare my screen. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you inviting me. And I had a great time. Stop share.
Okay, I'm going to spotlight myself so we can both be on screen. So awesome talk. I'll be downloading iNaturalist immediately after we finish this session. So one question we did get from Melissa DeGroot is, do you ever worry about oversimplifying concepts too much? How do you strike the balance between accessibility and accuracy?
That's really interesting. I recently have been having that experience almost on the opposite end. So I used to be a research scientist. I was in a lab. I was writing papers, doing statistics. It was all like very, you know, I knew what chemicals I was extracting or what DNA I was like trying to describe. And now I'm not really a scientist anymore. I'm kind of just a communicator and educator. And I've noticed that the engagement has actually gone down on my Instagram because I'm not explaining the reaction between acetic acid. I'm just kind of like sharing beautiful photos. Like, I think people want to know more. And like the cost of education in America, I know it's different in other parts of the world, but the cost of education in America is so high and inhibitory that if people can find out from a real person who knows what's talking about a complex subject, I think you should go for it. And it all comes with, you know, I'm lucky that I've been doing this since 2015 and kind of have been able to take my own notice trends and stuff like that. I think that's just what you have to do too, and see what your audience is interested in. And I have a lot of graduate students that followed me. So they're smart people, right? They want to know about a different subject. And people, I think, are smart, and society sometimes makes it that they can't be smart or they can't continue their education. So I would make them smart and see what happens.
Awesome. Thank you. Matt Cahoe says, Kristen, do you monitor uptake and influence on social media of your own posts and or topics you care about? If so, what apps do you use? I guess, do you like tracking apps for social media?
I do not. It's honestly, I don't have time because you know, right after this, like I gotta go do my other job, my real job, pay my bills. So I wish I could, I wish I had time, and who knows, maybe someday that'll be a thing for me to, I'm sorry, I don't have information for that, but Instagram does have an analytics thing, but it's so variable. And I hear all these rumors about like the algorithm or whatever and how it's changing. And I just, it's too much for me to even follow. So I just keep doing me and like seeing what works and what doesn't, without, you know, any analytics.
Yeah. This is more of a comment from Devin Stewart that she has a personal vendetta against the spotted lanternfly in her garden in Hershey. They attack her roses and Arctic kiwi. I don't know what that is. Sounds cool. But she uses a hand vacuum with insecticide to pick up the nymphs. But she can't get rid of all of them, even doing that. And I told you on our prep session, I've personally killed 4 spotted lanternflies and felt very good each time I did it. So yeah, I've been influenced by you to kill.
That's funny. That's cool.
Yeah, it's been really cool. Paul Kelly is asking, do you think any particular platform is better suited to science communication? For example, moderating algorithm trends, et cetera.
I do see that over the years, things change, right? I mean, just with the whole example of explaining how Facebook changed, right? Like it used to be where your aunt and uncle would get updates about you, and now, like, that they get updates from the politicians they follow, right? Things change with these apps. And I think that there was a peak in my personal opinion, there was a peak for Instagram, and then TikTok came, and there was a big flood to TikTok because it's fast. It's a fast form of communication. And then also the format of the videos was different. I've noticed something interesting as a sidebar. I have two young nieces. They're 3 and 5. They do not want to look at pictures. They only want to look at videos. You show them a picture and they say, why isn't it moving? And so it's just like this thing that I'm sure people who understand brains and how we interact with people, like there's something in our brain that interacts more with a video. And so I see TikTok as like kind of, really high up there right now in engagement, but then Instagram is changing. And so is Facebook, right? They're all making more videos because they want to keep up with this curve and this change. So there's like constantly a race for who's going to be the most utilized. And then, it also comes to the creator to be able to adapt and change to that. So I started doing more reels, and it gets a lot of comments. Like, it's just how things are.
Yeah, I mean, I've also heard that video content on Instagram gets pushed up in the algorithm. Photos don't.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I've also noticed photos of faces get pushed up more than photos of other things.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing, right? iNaturalist is an algorithm because you insert the time, the place, and then the photo. And so it knows based off of your geology and the time of year that it constricts it, and then it scans the photo and it says green, 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 red, rose, right? It also looks at shapes. So I'm sure Instagram can look at the face and say, this will get more engagement.
Absolutely. Yeah. Has there been like one particularly cool thing you've learned from iNaturalist and our social media platform that you wouldn't have learned by just being a scientist and because you're exposed to?
Yeah, in the beginning, I was really against iNaturalist because of my own, opinion. I was very snobby about it. I was like, well, how are you going to learn what things are if you're not learning like the family traits of plants or whatever? And it was just like giving people an identification, like this is it, without any context. And sometimes it would be wrong. And people would believe the computer more than me. And I was like, this is ridiculous. But then with more input, more scanning of those photos and the algorithms, it's gotten really good. And it's also, they've hired a lot of scientists, and it's become more of an educational tool. And I utilize it now. I utilize it because I'm outside in places that most people can't go because it's private property or like it's Forest Service land. And so I have a chance to contribute something that might be rare to a scientist at Kentucky University that's studying this thing, but they can't physically drive to the places I get to go for work. And I've learned a lot of things now that I'm utilizing it more. Like, I mean, it is a really cool tool for identification. I think you could learn a lot, and you could get lost in a loophole or a black hole of, you're now a snail expert just from iNaturalist.
That's awesome. Nicole, our previous speaker, is asking, do you use eBird?
I do sometimes. Birds are hard for me. I don't know what it is. My brain just like, if you tell me the Latin name of a plant once or a mushroom once, it's in there forever. If you explain to me like how a bird looks, I'm like, all right. So eBird has been interesting. And Merlin too has been interesting, which is another app that can actually listen to birds singing as long as you have an internet connection, and it'll tell you what bird is there based off the song, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I personally use Merlin and eBird together when I go birding. They're really great together. Emily Copeland asks, do you recommend using data viz platforms like Canva, BioRender, or PictoChart for your posts?
I would, if you're looking to be in that culture of, more of, I think those are really specific. They're not as general public as like Facebook or Instagram, right? But so I agree. And this kind of goes back to that earlier question of how intense do you want to have the information, or how specific, right? Are you trying to advertise your information to an audience that can understand something more or notice something important in the photo, right? Like I see that all the time where people will put up a picture of a flower, and like my brain looks at the pollinators where they have no idea they even saw it. So if you're interested in that audience of those platforms, I would go for it. Yeah.
Tanya Litwick mentions that the entomologist she works with at the Museum of Natural History in the Smithsonian had a multi-year iNaturalist project going at Joshua Tree, looking at yucca moth and Microhymenoptera parasites.
Perfect. Wonderful. Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah. Yeah, it's it's a great tool because you can be the expert on Microhymenoptera and parasitoids, but like if you can't get out there because you're on the computer running stats or R, like you need to have more people look at them. And honestly, a lot of people, like a part of that project is probably just looking at yucca flowers. I'm not assuming, but like my example would be that the scientists would just look for yucca flowers and then look for the insect that wasn't actually tagged in it, right?
That makes a lot of sense. Do we have any other questions for anybody or comments? Great. Well, thank you so much, Kristen, or K-Dubs, for your presentation.